Sarah's fingers flew across the laptop keyboard with the fury of someone who had finally found a target for 3 months of suppressed rage. The kitchen table was covered with printed emails, bank statements, and legal documents she'd been too heartbroken to examine closely during the divorce proceedings. Now, under the harsh overhead light at 7 in the morning, patterns were emerging that made her stomach clench with a mixture of nausea and vindication. She pulled up the public records database and typed in Richard Henderson's name. Law firm. Partnerships, real estate transactions, professional associations. Everything left digital footprints if you knew where to look, and 15 years of forensic accounting had taught Sarah exactly where to dig. Outside, she could hear Karen's voice, carrying across the yard, probably calling every member of the Homeowners Association to report Sarah's environmental terrorism. Let her make her calls. Sarah was making some calls of her own. The first hit was Henderson, Crest and Associates client list from their website. Corporate clients, estate planning, family law, real estate disputes. Standard stuff. But the second search revealed something more interesting. A property transaction from 6 months ago. Richard Henderson had purchased a vacation home in Hilton. Head for $1.2 million. Cash. Family law attorneys made good money, but not cash for vacation homes money. Not unless they had additional revenue streams. Sarah cross-referenced the date with her divorce timeline and felt ice form in her chest. Henderson had purchased the property 2 weeks after David's final settlement payment had been approved. The same settlement that had somehow left David with liquid assets, while Sarah inherited a mountain of debt she didn't remember accumulating. Her phone buzzed. A text from her sister Jennifer. Saw Karen's FB post about your pool drama. Want me to come over? Sarah stared at the message. Karen was posting about this on Facebook? She opened a browser tab and navigated to Karen's profile, her blood pressure spiking with each word she read. When neighbors disregard environmental laws and property boundaries, the whole community suffers. Documenting violations for legal action. Some people think rules don't apply to them. Hashtag accountability matters. Hashtag protect our neighborhood. 47 likes and counting. Comments from neighbors Sarah had considered friends, expressing sympathy for Karen's situation and disappointment in Sarah's irresponsible behavior. People who had attended her barbecues, who had brought casseroles after David left, now publicly condemning her based on Karen's carefully crafted narrative. Sarah screenshot everything, then opened a new document. If Karen wanted to play the public opinion game, she was about to learn that information warfare cut both ways. But first, she needed to verify the property survey claim. The county assessor's website was clunky and slow, but Sarah had patience. Now, she pulled up the plat maps for both her property and Karen's, comparing the official boundary lines with her memory of the pool installation. The measurements were technical, filled with degrees and coordinates that meant nothing to her, but one detail jumped out. The last survey update for Karen's property was indeed from the previous month. But here's what made Sarah's forensic accountant instincts twitch. The survey had been ordered and paid for by Henderson, Crest and Associates, not by Karen personally. By her attorney. Sarah sat back in her chair, pieces clicking together with mechanical precision. Henderson had ordered a property survey of Karen's lot while he was still representing David in their divorce, which meant he'd had access to Sarah's financial records, knew exactly how broke she was, and had been planning this property grab months in advance. Her phone rang. Jennifer again. Don't answer, Sarah muttered, but her sister's ringtone, "We are the champions," was too ironic to ignore. Hey, Jen. Sarah, honey, are you okay? Karen's social media posts make it sound like you're having some kind of breakdown. Sarah laughed, a sound with sharp edges. Oh, I'm having something, but it's not a breakdown. It's more like a breakthrough. What do you mean? I mean, I just figured out why my divorce settlement was so spectacularly unfair, and why Karen Whitfield suddenly decided she needed a property survey last month. Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see the pool's water level had dropped to the deep end. 6 feet down, 7 feet, 8. The concrete bottom was beginning to show, stained and ugly after months of neglect. Something was glinting down there, catching the morning light. Sarah, you're scaring me. What are you talking about? I'm talking about conspiracy to commit fraud. I'm talking about attorney misconduct and fabricated property disputes. I'm talking about the fact that my own husband's lawyer has been planning to steal my house since before the divorce was even finalized. Silence on the other end of the line. Jen, you there? I'm here. Sarah, Those are serious accusations. You need to be careful about what? About fighting back? About refusing to roll over and let them destroy what's left of my life. Sarah stood up, pacing to the window. Look, I know how this sounds. Paranoid divorced woman sees conspiracies everywhere. But I've got documentation, Jen. Financial records, property transactions, timeline correlations. This isn't paranoia, it's forensic accounting. The glint in the pool caught her attention again. Something metallic, reflecting the strengthening sunlight. Probably just a pool fitting or piece of equipment, but it seemed oddly positioned. What are you going to do? Jennifer asked quietly. I'm going to expose them. All of them. Karen, Henderson, and anyone else who's been playing games with my life. How? Sarah smiled grimly. Karen made this public when she posted on social media. She wants neighborhood accountability? Fine. Let's see how the Homeowners Association feels about having a board member who fabricates property disputes. Let's see how the State Bar Association feels about lawyers who use confidential client information to plan real estate scams. Sarah, I have to go, Jen. I need to check something outside. Sarah hung up and walked out to the pool deck. The water was down to 2 feet now, revealing the full scope of the concrete basin. And there, gleaming in the deep end corner, was something that definitely didn't belong. She grabbed the pool skimmer's telescoping pole and extended it to its full length, using the net to fish out the mysterious object. It was heavy, requiring significant effort to lift from the pool bottom. When she finally managed to retrieve it, Sarah dropped the pole with a clatter. It was a metal strongbox. Old, waterproofed, and secured with a combination lock that looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Sarah stared at the box, her mind racing. The pool had been installed 3 years ago, which meant this had been buried in her backyard before construction began, before she and David had even moved in. The previous owners, the Kowalskis, had lived here for 30 years before retiring to Florida. She carried the box inside and set it on the kitchen counter, running her fingers over its corroded surface. There was an address label, faded but still legible, Walter Kowalski, 1247 Maple Drive. Her address. Sarah grabbed her phone and dialed information, asking for Walter Kowalski in Sarasota, Florida. 2 minutes later, she was listening to a phone ring 800 miles away. Hello. An elderly man's voice, cautious. Mr. Kowalski? This is Sarah Matthews. I live in your old house on Maple Drive. Sarah. Of course. How are you, dear? How's the house treating you? Well, that's actually why I'm calling. I'm having some work done, and we found a strongbox buried in the backyard. It has your name on it. The silence stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the connection had dropped. Mr. Kowalski. You found the box. His voice had changed, becoming heavy with something that sounded like relief and dread combined. Should I mail it to you? No. The response was immediate and firm. No, don't mail it anywhere. Don't tell anyone you found it. And whatever you do, don't let the Whitfields know about it. Sarah's pulse spiked. The Whitfields? You mean Karen? Her father-in-law, Marcus Whitfield. He's been trying to get his hands on that box for 15 years. The kitchen seemed to tilt around Sarah. What's in it? Another long pause. When Walter spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. Evidence. Documents. Photographs. Things that Marcus Whitfield paid me a great deal of money to keep buried. He cleared his throat. Things that could destroy several very prominent people in your neighborhood if they ever came to light. Sarah sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the innocuous metal box that had suddenly become radioactive. Mr. Kowalski, I need to understand what I'm dealing with here. You're dealing with 30 years of dirty secrets, Sarah. Bribery, fraud, cover-ups. Marcus Whitfield was the city planning commissioner for 2 decades, and he wasn't exactly ethical in his dealings. A lot of people made a lot of money by knowing the right development plans ahead of time, approving the right zoning changes, looking the other way on the right environmental violations. Sarah's mind flashed to Karen's environmental committee position, her intimate knowledge of city regulations, her connection to Richard Henderson. When did you say you buried this? 1995. right before I retired from the city attorney's office. I was supposed to destroy those files, but, well, let's just say I believed in insurance policies. The city attorney's office. Sarah felt another piece click into place. Mr. Kowalski, was Richard Henderson ever involved with the city attorney's office? Henderson? Sure, he was Marcus's prever. The combination lock clicked open on Sarah's fourth attempt, Walter's birthday, which she'd found in the county records. The strongbox opened with a rusty creak that sounded like a coffin lid in the silence of her kitchen. Inside, 30 years of corruption lay neatly organized in manila folders, each labeled with dates and names that read like a who's who of her neighborhood's most respected families. But it was the photographs that made Sarah's hands shake as she spread them across her kitchen table, pictures of envelopes changing hands in restaurant parking lots. Marcus Whitfield shaking hands with developers beside blueprint-covered tables. City council meetings where the same faces appeared again and again, always in the background, always watching. And at the center of it all, a younger Richard Henderson, documenting everything with the methodical precision of a man who understood the value of leverage. Sarah photographed every document with her phone, uploading them to 3 separate cloud storage accounts. Whatever was about to happen, she wasn't going to let these disappear again. Her doorbell rang at exactly 2 p.m. Through the peephole, Sarah saw a thin man in a city inspector's uniform holding a clipboard, flanked by Karen Whitfield. In her power suit armor, and, to Sarah's grim satisfaction, Richard Henderson himself. The lawyer looked exactly as she remembered from the divorce proceedings, silver-haired, expensively dressed, and radiating the kind of quiet confidence that came from never having lost a case. Sarah opened the door with her phone already recording. "Good afternoon," she said brightly. "You must be the environmental inspector," Karen called. The inspector, his name tag read Rodriguez, nodded professionally. "I'm here about a complaint regarding improper pool water discharge. I need to examine your drainage setup and take some water samples." Of course, Sarah stepped aside. "Please, come in. I have some things I'd like to show you as well." Henderson's eyes narrowed slightly, but he followed Karen and Rodriguez through Sarah's living room toward the back door. Sarah noticed he was carrying a leather portfolio that looked suspiciously like legal documents. "I have to say," Sarah continued conversationally as they walked, "this is quite a coincidence. Having the neighborhood's premier attorney show up for a simple environmental inspection." "Mr. Henderson is here regarding the property boundary issue," Karen said stiffly. "Which is a separate matter entirely." "Is it?" Sarah opened the sliding door to her backyard. "Because it seems to me like everything happening today is connected to my pool drainage." They stepped onto the deck, where the now empty pool gaped like an open wound in the concrete. Inspector Rodriguez walked to the edge and peered down, making notes on his clipboard. "This is a complete drain and refill?" he asked. "Yes." "Maintenance? Cleaning?" Sarah watched Henderson carefully as he approached the pool edge. "Though I have to admit, I found some interesting things at the bottom." Henderson went very still. "What kind of things?" "Well," Sarah pulled out her phone, opening the photo gallery. "Let's just say that when you drain away 30 years of accumulated sediment, you never know what's going to surface." She held up the phone, showing the first photograph, Marcus Whitfield handing a manila envelope to a man in a city planning office. Karen gasped. Henderson's face went white. "Where did you get that?" Henderson's voice was barely controlled. "From a strongbox that was buried under my pool." Sarah swiped to the next photo. "This one's particularly interesting." "That's you, isn't it, Mr. Henderson?" "Younger, but definitely you." "And that's a briefcase full of cash you're handing to the zoning commissioner." Inspector Rodriguez looked up from his clipboard, suddenly very interested in the conversation happening around him. "Those photographs are fabricated," Henderson said quickly. "Digital manipulation." "Are they?" Sarah swiped again. "Because I also have the original negatives, the financial records, the meeting transcripts, and sworn affidavits from someone who was present for all of these transactions." She smiled sweetly. "Someone who's very much alive and very willing to testify about 30 years of municipal corruption." Karen found her voice. "Sarah, you don't know what you're dealing with, don't I?" Sarah interrupted. "Because it seems Pretty clear to me. Your father-in-law ran a bribery and kickback scheme for 20 years. He used his position as planning commissioner to feed inside information to developers, approved fraudulent environmental impact studies, and took cash payments to fast-track projects that should never have been built. She turned to Henderson. And you were his bagman. You structured the deals, laundered the money through fake legal fees, and made sure everyone got paid while keeping the paper trail clean. Henderson's jaw worked silently. Sarah could practically see him calculating legal strategies. The really beautiful part, Sarah continued, is that you've been so worried about covering up the old crimes that you started committing new ones. Like using confidential information from my divorce proceedings to plan this property grab. That's absurd, Henderson managed. Is it? Because I have documentation showing that you ordered Karen's property survey while you were still my husband's attorney. Which means you had access to my financial records and knew exactly how broke I'd be after the divorce you engineered. Sarah's voice hardened. You knew I wouldn't be able to afford legal representation for a property dispute. Inspector Rodriguez had stopped pretending to examine the pool and was openly listening now. The plan was perfect, really, Sarah said. Wait for Walter Kowalski to die, then manufacture a property dispute that would force me to sell. Karen gets my lot for a patio expansion, you get to search the property for the buried evidence, and I get to lose the last thing I had left. Karen's face was the color of old paper. Sarah, please what? Please let you steal my house. Please pretend I don't know that your entire family fortune was built on municipal corruption. Sarah laughed, a sound with teeth. Oh, Karen. We are way past please. Henderson stepped forward, and for the first time since Sarah had known him, he looked dangerous rather than polished. Ms. Matthews, you're in possession of stolen city documents. That's a felony. I strongly suggest you return them before this situation escalates further. Stolen. Sarah raised an eyebrow. These documents were legally obtained from property. Shown. The same property you're claiming belongs to your client. She gestured toward the empty pool. The same property where you buried evidence of crimes 30 years ago. The box wasn't buried there, Henderson said quickly, then froze as he realized what he'd just admitted. Inspector Rodriguez lowered his clipboard. Excuse me, but did you just admit to knowing about buried evidence? The silence stretched like a wire about to snap. Sarah smiled. Inspector Rodriguez, I think you're going to find that this isn't just an environmental violation case. I think you're going to find that this is something the FBI might be very interested in. Henderson's portfolio hit the concrete with a slap as his hands clenched into fists. You have no idea what you're doing. These people, the families involved, they have resources you can't imagine. They'll destroy you. Will they? Sarah pulled out a second phone, her old phone, the one she'd been meaning to recycle. Because I've just spent the last hour uploading copies of every document to news outlets, social media platforms, and the state attorney general's office. I've also sent copies to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit and the IIS Fraud Division. Karen made a sound like air leaving a balloon. You see, Sarah continued, I learned something important during my divorce. When someone has all the power and you have nothing left to lose, the only winning move is to flip the board over and watch the pieces scatter. Henderson's composure finally cracked completely. You stupid bitch, you have no idea what you've just done. These aren't just old crimes, some of those projects are still standing. Some of those developers are still operating. When this comes out, it's going to destroy legitimate businesses, ruin innocent families, like mine was ruined. Sarah's voice cut like broken glass. Like my life was systematically destroyed so you could cover up crimes from before I was even born. She turned to Inspector Rodriguez, who was furiously taking notes. Inspector, I think you'll find that the environmental violations here go far beyond one woman draining her pool. I think you'll find that there are buildings in this neighborhood that were approved with fraudulent environmental impact studies. Developments that were built on protected wetlands. Toxic waste sites that were covered up rather than properly remediated. Rodriguez looked up sharply. Do you have documentation of specific sites? Sarah smiled and pulled out a thick manila folder from behind her back. Addresses, dates, environmental test results, and proof of cover-up payments. 30 years' worth. Henderson lunged forward, reaching for the folder, but Sarah stepped back smoothly. She said. These are copies. The originals are in a very safe place. Along with video testimony from Walter Kowalski, who's decided that 83 is a good age to finally tell the truth about what really happened in this city. Karen finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. Sarah, my children live here. My grandchildren play in these yards. If you expose this, if you destroy the families involved, then maybe you should have thought of that before you decided to steal my house, Sarah replied coldly. Maybe you should have thought of that before you The first news van arrived at 6:47 a.m., followed by 3 more within the hour. By noon, Maple Drive looked like the scene of a natural disaster, with reporters, camera crews, and curious neighbors crowding the usually pristine sidewalks. Sarah watched from her kitchen window as Karen's house became a fortress, every blind drawn, every door locked, while investigators in cheap suits knocked repeatedly on the front door. Sarah's phone had been ringing non-stop since dawn. FBI, State, Attorney General, IRS, EPA, and at least 6 different news outlets, all wanting copies of the documents, wanting interviews, wanting her to tell her story on camera. She'd turned them all down except one, an investigative journalist named Maria Santos from the state's largest newspaper, who'd been tracking municipal corruption cases for 15 years. The scope of this is incredible, Maria said, sitting at Sarah's kitchen table with the documents spread between them. We are talking about potentially hundreds of millions in fraudulent contracts, dozens of environmental violations that were covered up, and a conspiracy that reaches into City Hall, the Planning Commission, and at least 3 major development firms. Sarah sipped her coffee, feeling strangely calm for someone whose life had exploded into a media circus. How long before arrests start? Days, maybe hours. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit has been building cases against some of these developers. For months, your documents just gave them the smoking gun they needed. Maria looked up from a particularly damning financial record. They've already executed search warrants on Henderson's law firm and frozen several offshore accounts. Through the window, Sarah could see a black SUV parked in front of Karen's house. 2 men in dark suits had been stationed there since sunrise. What about Karen? Sarah asked. That depends. If she cooperates, testifies against the bigger fish, she might avoid prison. If she tries to stonewall. Maria shrugged. Her father-in-law's dead, but the family trust that holds their assets is about to be frozen pending investigation. She's looking at losing everything. The house, the cars, the country club membership, all of it. Sarah felt a flicker of something that might have been pity, then remembered Karen's smug smile as she'd threatened to destroy Sarah's life. Good, she said simply. Maria's phone buzzed. She glanced at it and whistled low. Richard Henderson just surrendered himself to federal authorities. His law partner is claiming they had no knowledge of his activities and are fully cooperating with investigators. The doorbell rang, making both women look toward the front of the house. Probably another reporter, Maria said, but Sarah was already getting up. Through the peephole, she saw David standing on her doorstep, looking haggard and nervous. He was flanked by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. Blonde, expensive clothes. Probably his new girlfriend. Sarah opened the door without removing the chain. What do you want, David? Her ex-husband looked like he hadn't slept in days. Sarah, we need to talk. About the divorce settlement, about Henderson, about how you conspired with a corrupt attorney to steal my assets. Sarah's voice was pleasant, conversational. About how you participated in a scheme to leave me financially vulnerable so your girlfriend's family could steal my house. David's face went white. The blonde woman, who Sarah now realized looked remarkably like a younger version of Karen, took a step backward. You're Jennifer Whitfield, Sarah said, the pieces clicking together. Karen's daughter. The woman lifted her chin defiantly. I'm Jennifer Morrison now. I've been divorced from the Whitfield family for 3 years. But not from their money, Sarah observed. Not from their connections. Not from their lawyers. David found his voice. Sarah, I never meant for things to go this far. When Henderson suggested the settlement terms, I thought he was just being thorough. You thought he was helping you steal everything I'd worked for while leaving me with all the debt, Sarah corrected. You thought you'd found a way to walk away from our marriage without consequences while I paid the price for both of us. She looked at Jennifer, understanding flooding through her. Let me guess. You met David at one of Henderson's client parties. You were recently divorced yourself, probably from another one of Henderson's clients. You bonded over your shared experience with his thorough legal work. Jennifer's silence was answer enough. And when you found out David was married to someone, living next door to your mother, it must have seemed like fate. 2 problems, 1 solution. Get David away from his inconvenient wife while simultaneously solving your mother's property expansion dreams. David stepped forward. Sarah, please. The FBI wants to interview me about the divorce proceedings. They're saying I might have been an unwitting participant in fraud. If this goes to trial, then you should have thought of that before you decided to destroy my life, Sarah said simply. You made your choice, David. You chose Henderson's advice over honesty. You chose Jennifer's family money over our marriage. You chose to leave me with nothing while you walked away with everything. She started to close the door, then paused. Oh, and David? You might want to get a new lawyer. I hear Henderson's going to be a little busy with federal charges for the next few years. She closed the door and walked back to the kitchen, where Maria was finishing up her notes. Ex-husband? Maria asked. Ex-husband and his new girlfriend, who happens to be Karen's daughter. Sarah sat down heavily. Apparently, this conspiracy goes even deeper than we thought. Maria's eyes lit up with the excitement of a reporter who just found buried treasure. Are you willing to go on record about that connection? Sarah considered. 3 days ago, she would have said no. 3 days ago, she would have tried to handle this quietly, privately, would have tried to protect everyone's feelings and maintain some dignity. 3 days ago, she'd still believe that being reasonable and fair would be rewarded with reasonableness and fairness in return. Yes, she said. I'm willing to go on record about all of it. Her phone rang again. This time, the caller ID showed a number she recognized. Her divorce attorney, the overworked public defender who'd barely had time to review her case before the settlement was finalized. Sarah, this is Janet Morrison from Legal Aid. I've been watching the news about your situation, and I need to ask, did you know about any of this corruption during your divorce proceedings? No, Sarah said. I trusted my husband's choice of attorney. I thought Henderson was looking out for both of us. Because I've been reviewing your case file, and there are some irregularities I missed the first time around. Financial disclosures that don't match, asset valuations that seem deliberately underestimated, debt attributions that don't make sense. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. What are you saying? I'm saying that if Henderson was using your divorce to position you for this property grab, then your settlement was obtained through fraud, which means it's voidable. The words hung in the air like a promise of redemption. All of it? Sarah asked quietly. Potentially all of it. The asset division, the debt assignment, even the spousal support waiver you signed. If we can prove Henderson was acting with criminal intent, we can petition to have the entire settlement overturned. Sarah looked out the window at the media circus surrounding her house, at the FBI agents stationed at Karen's door, at the neighbors who'd been gossiping about her breakdown, now whispering nervously about property values and criminal investigations. Janet, she said, I think it's time David learned what it feels like to lose everything. After she hung up, Maria was grinning broadly. You know, the reporter said, when I woke up this morning, I thought I was covering a municipal corruption story. Now I'm looking at conspiracy, fraud, racketeering, and what might be the biggest legal scandal this state has seen in decades. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Walter Kowalski. Saw the news. Proud of you. Truth has a way of surfacing eventually. She showed the message to Maria, who immediately started typing notes. Can I quote him on that? Maria asked. You can quote all of us, Sarah said. Every victim, every whistleblower, everyone who was too scared or too powerless to speak up before. Through the window, she watched as another black SUV pulled up to Karen's house. This time, the agents who got out were carrying boxes, evidence containers. Sarah's doorbell rang again. This time, it was Inspector Rodriguez, looking official and apologetic. Ms. Matthews, I need to apologize for yesterday. I came here expecting a routine environmental violation, and instead I walked into the biggest corruption case of my career. Found some interesting things in your investigation?" Sarah asked. Rodriguez shook his head in amazement. 3 buildings in this neighborhood alone were constructed on improperly remediated contaminated soil. The environmental impact studies were falsified, the soil samples were faked, and the cleanup certifications were bought and paid for. He gestured toward Karen's house, including the foundation under the Whitfield property. That entire lot should have been designated a hazardous waste site 30 years ago. Sarah felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. So Karen's been living on poisoned ground this whole time. Not just living on it, planning to expand onto your property to get away from it. Rodriguez's expression was grim. The soil contamination extends about 6 feet into your lot, right up to where your pool was built. The irony was so perfect it made Sarah laugh out loud. So the pool that is. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her backyard watching her pool contractor make the final adjustments to the new filtration system. The water was crystal clear, reflecting the autumn sky like polished glass. In the distance, construction crews were demolishing what used to be the Whitfield mansion, their excavators tearing through contaminated soil that would require millions of dollars in environmental remediation. "Beautiful job," the contractor said, packing up his tools. "This is probably the nicest pool renovation I've done all year." Sarah smiled, running her hand along the new travertine coping she'd been able to afford after her divorce settlement was overturned. The financial recovery had been spectacular. David had been forced to return nearly everything he'd taken, plus pay damages for fraud. The house was fully hers now, the mortgage restructured at favorable terms, and her savings account had a balance that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Her phone buzzed with a text from Maria Santos, final article publishing tomorrow. Front page, above the fold. "You ready for this?" Sarah typed back, "Ready." The investigative series had been running for 5 months, each installment revealing new layers of corruption that stretched back decades. Henderson was awaiting trial on 17 federal charges. Marcus Whitfield's estate had been seized by the government. 3 city council members had resigned in disgrace. And Karen was currently serving 2 years in minimum security prison for conspiracy and tax evasion, though she'd avoided more serious charges by cooperating with federal investigators. Her daughter Jennifer had fled to Europe after her. Own assets were frozen, leaving David to face fraud charges alone. Sarah's doorbell rang, pulling her from her thoughts. Through the front window, she could see a familiar figure on her doorstep, Walter Kowalski, leaning heavily on a walker butt, grinning broadly. "Walter." Sarah opened the door wide. "I thought you were still in Florida." "I was," the elderly man said, shuffling inside with the determined gait of someone who refused to let age slow him down. "But I wanted to see for myself how this all turned out. Plus, I have something for you." He handed her a manila envelope, thick with documents. "What's this?" "The deed to the lot next door," Walter said casually. "Turns out, when the government seizes property for environmental remediation, they eventually have to sell it. And when that property is contaminated with industrial chemicals, it tends to go for significantly less than market value." Sarah stared at the deed. "You bought Karen's property." "I bought it, and now I'm giving it to you." Walter's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Call it a thank you gift for having the courage to open that box when everyone else wanted to keep it buried." Sarah sank into her living room chair, holding the deed with trembling hands. The lot next door, Karen's former domain, now belonged to her. "Walter, I can't accept this. It's too much." "Nonsense. I'm 84 years old with more money than I can spend and no family to leave it to. Besides," he gestured toward the window where the demolition crews were working, "someone needs to make sure that land gets properly cleaned up and turned into something positive." Sarah looked at the deed, then at Walter's expectant face, then out at the excavators removing decades of poisoned earth. "You know what I'm going to do with it," she said slowly. "Tell me." "I'm going to turn it into a community garden. Organic vegetables, children's play area, maybe some fruit trees. After they finish the soil remediation, of course." Walter's laugh was delighted. "Perfect. Absolutely perfect. From corruption to cultivation." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the demolition crews work. The Whitfield mansion, that symbol of ill-gotten wealth and neighborhood intimidation, was now just a pile of expensive rubble waiting to be hauled away. Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister's number. "Jennifer, are you watching the demolition?" "From my office window," Jennifer replied. "It's better than cable TV. Listen, I'm calling because I just heard from David's lawyer." Sarah's mood sobered slightly. David's criminal trial was set to begin next month, and while Sarah had testified before the grand jury, she'd been dreading the actual trial proceedings. What did they want? He wants to plead guilty. Avoid a trial entirely. His lawyer says. The federal prosecutors are willing to recommend minimum sentencing if he cooperates fully and makes complete financial restitution. Sarah considered this. A trial would be public, messy, and emotionally draining. It would also force her to relive the worst period of her life in front of cameras and reporters. What kind of sentence are we talking about? 18 months, probably serve 10 with good behavior, plus 5 years probation and community service. And full restitution. Everything. The hidden assets, the fraudulent debt transfers, even punitive damages for emotional distress. Sarah looked around her living room, newly furnished with money. That should have been hers all along, decorated with art she'd chosen herself, filled with light and space and the kind of peace she'd forgotten was possible. "Tell them I'll accept the plea agreement," she said. "On one condition." What condition? David has to personally apologize. Not through lawyers, not in a written statement. He has to come here, to my house, and acknowledge what he did. Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, are you sure? You don't owe him anything. You don't have to give him the chance to." "It's not for him," Sarah interrupted. "It's for me. I need to see him admit what he did. I need to look him in the eye and hear him say it." After she hung up, Walter was studying her with interest. "Closure?" he asked. "Justice," Sarah corrected. "Real justice. Not just legal consequences, but actual accountability." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Sarah opened it to find Inspector Rodriguez, now wearing a supervisor's badge and looking significantly more relaxed than the last time she'd seen him. "Ms. Matthews, I hope you don't mind me stopping by. I wanted to give you an update on the environmental investigation." "Please, come in. This is Walter Kowalski, the man who preserved all the evidence." Rodriguez shook Walter's hand with obvious respect. "Mr. Kowalski, I can't thank you enough. Your documentation led us to contamination sites we never would have found otherwise." "How many sites total?" Sarah asked. 17 properties in this county alone, with investigations expanding to 3 neighboring counties. We're looking at the largest environmental fraud case in state history. Rodriguez's expression grew serious. "Some of these sites have been leaching toxins into groundwater for 30 years. The cleanup costs are going to be enormous." "But they'll be cleaned up?" Walter asked. "Every single one. The responsible parties are paying for remediation as part of their plea agreements. Where the responsible parties are dead or bankrupt, the EPA is using Superfund money." Rodriguez smiled. "Your neighborhood is going to be cleaner than it's been since before development started." After Rodriguez left, Sarah and Walter sat on her back deck, watching the sun set over her sparkling pool and the empty lot next door. "You know," Walter said thoughtfully, "when I buried that box 30 years ago, I thought I was just protecting myself. I never imagined it would end up protecting an entire community." "Sometimes the right thing happens for the wrong reasons," Sarah replied. "And sometimes it takes 30 years for justice to surface." Her phone buzzed with one final message of the day, from Maria Santos, headline for tomorrow, "From pool drain to prison chains, how one woman's property dispute exposed decades of corruption." "You've started something bigger than you know," Sarah showed the message to Walter, who chuckled appreciatively. "You realize this isn't over, don't you?" he said. "Other cities, other neighborhoods where similar things happened. People are going to read about what you did and start asking questions about their own communities." Sarah looked out over her. Reclaimed kingdom, her house, her pool, her new property, her future garden, and felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of having fought for something and won. "Good," she said simply. Let them ask questions. Let them demand answers. Let them learn that when you have nothing left to lose, you have everything you need to fight. As if summoned by her words, David's rental car pulled into her driveway. Through the windshield, she could see his familiar profile, older now and marked by stress, but still recognizable as the man she'd once loved enough to marry. That him? Walter asked. That's him. Want me to stay? Sarah considered, then shook her head. No, this is something I need to do alone. She walked through her house, legally and completely hers now, and opened the front door before. David could ring the bell. He looked terrible. Prison pallor, cheap clothes, the defeated posture of a man who'd lost everything and knew it was his own fault. Hello, Sarah. David. They stood there for a moment, measuring each other across the threshold of the life they'd once shared. I came to apologize, he said finally. For all of it. The affair, the lies, letting Henderson manipulate our divorce. I know it doesn't change anything, but I needed you to hear it from me. Sarah studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation. Or self-pity. She found only exhaustion and what appeared to be genuine remorse. Why? She asked. Why did you do it? David's shoulders sagged. Because it was easier than fighting for our marriage. Because Jennifer made me feel like a different person, someone more successful and important than I really was. Because Henderson M. The water cascaded out in torrents, revealing years of secrets buried beneath. Sarah thought draining her own pool would be simple maintenance, until Karen's scream shattered the morning silence. That's my property. But as the last drops disappeared, something glinted in the deep end that would flip their neighborhood war upside down. Because sometimes, when you drain the lies away, the truth surfaces in ways no one saw coming. The pool pump's mechanical growl cut through the pre-dawn stillness as Sarah Matthews stood barefoot on the cool concrete deck, watching 20,000 gallons of chlorinated water spiral toward the storm drains. Steam rose from her coffee mug in the crisp October air, and for the first time in months, she felt something approaching peace. Finally, she whispered to herself, watching the water level drop inch by inch. The pool that had become a symbol of everything wrong with her marriage was dying a slow, necessary death. 3 months since David had walked out. 3 months since he'd stood in this exact spot and declared that he was done pretending to be happy. 3 months since she'd realized that the gleaming blue rectangle they'd spent $40,000 installing had been less about family fun and more about David's midlife crisis and his need to impress the neighbors. The neighbors. Sarah's jaw tightened as she glanced toward the imposing McMansion next door, its bulk looming over her modest ranch-style home like a disapproving parent. Karen Whitfield's kitchen window faced directly onto Sarah's backyard, and Sarah had no doubt that even at 6:30 in the morning, Karen was probably watching through those expensive plantation shutters, cataloging every detail to report to the Homeowners Association. The water continued its relentless descent, revealing the pool's graduated depths. The shallow end safety rails emerged like silver bones, followed by the pool light's protective cage. Sarah had called the pool company. Yesterday, a complete drain and refill would cost $800, but it was necessary. The water had turned an unsettling shade of green during her weeks of depression-fueled neglect, and no amount of chemicals could restore its clarity. She was contemplating adding coffee to her morning routine permanently when the screaming started. What the hell do you think you're doing? Sarah spun around to see Karen Whitfield charging across the yard in a pink terry cloth robe and fuzzy slippers, her perfectly coiffed blonde hair wild with sleep and rage. At 52, Karen maintained her figure with the dedication of her Olympic athlete and her social standing with the ruthlessness of a medieval queen. Right now, she looked like both. Good morning to you too, Karen, Sarah said, taking a deliberate sip of her coffee. Don't you good morning me. Karen's voice pitched higher, attracting attention from Mrs. Chen's flower garden next door and causing a few crows to abandon their breakfast on Sarah's fence. You're draining your pool water directly into the storm drains. That's a violation of City Ordinance 847.3b. Sarah blinked. I'm sorry, what? Pool water discharge. Karen jabbed a manicured finger toward the draining hose. You can't just dump chlorinated water into the municipal system. It's toxic to aquatic life. I'm calling the city environmental office the moment they open. Karen, I've been draining pools for maintenance for 15 years. Everyone drains there. Not anymore, they don't. Karen pulled her phone from her robe pocket with the smooth efficiency of a gunslinger drawing a weapon. New regulations as of July 1st. I made sure I was aware of them because I chair the environmental committee for the neighborhood association. Of course she did. Sarah felt her peaceful morning dissolving as quickly as the pool water. Even if that's true, which I doubt, the damage is already done. Half the water is gone. Which means you need to stop it immediately and call a proper disposal company. Karen's thumb was already flying across her phone screen. This is going to cost you a fortune in fines, Sarah. Thousands of dollars. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Thousands of dollars she didn't have. The divorce had left her finances in shambles, and David's lawyer had somehow managed to protect most of their assets while saddling her with the majority of their debt. She was already working 16-hour days at the accounting firm just to make her mortgage payments. You know what, Karen? Sarah set down her coffee mug with enough force to slosh liquid onto the concrete. You can take your regulations and, Sarah, what's happening over there? Both women turned to see Mrs. Chen hurrying over from her garden, her weathered hands still covered in potting soil. At 78, Eleanor Chen was the neighborhood's unofficial mediator, a role she'd inherited after 40 years of marriage to a diplomat. Mrs. Chen, please tell Sarah that she can't drain chlorinated pool water into the storm system, Karen said, immediately shifting into her reasonable adult voice. She's violating environmental protection laws. Mrs. Chen looked from the half-empty pool to Karen's flushed face to Sarah's clenched fists. Perhaps we could discuss this calmly. There's nothing to discuss, Sarah interrupted. I'm maintaining my own pool on my own property. If Karen has a problem with that, she can file her little reports and leave me alone. Your property. Karen's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Your property. Something in her tone made Sarah's skin prickle. Yes, Karen. My property. The lot I pay taxes on, the house I pay a mortgage on, the pool that's going to bankrupt. Me to fix. Karen's smile was predatory. That's interesting. Because according to the property survey I just had done last month, 6 feet of your pool is actually on my land. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Mrs. Chen's hand flew to her mouth. Sarah felt the ground shift beneath her feet. That's impossible, Sarah said slowly. Is it? Karen's phone screen glowed as she scrolled through documents. Property lines aren't always where we think they are, especially in neighborhoods developed in phases like ours. Your house was built in 1987. Mine was built in 1991. When my contractor broke ground, they discovered that the original survey markers had been misplaced. Sarah's mind raced. The pool installation 3 years ago had required permits, inspections, setback measurements. We had surveys done. The pool company checked everything. Pool companies check approximate boundaries for permit purposes, Karen said sweetly. They don't commission official geodetic surveys with registered land surveyors. Which I did. Last month. At considerable expense. Why? The question came out as barely a whisper. Karen's smile widened. Because I'm planning to expand my patio. And I needed to know exactly where my property ends and yours begins. She turned her phone screen toward Sarah. Surprise. Sarah stared at the digital document, but the lines and measurements might as well have been hieroglyphics. Her vision was swimming, and she could hear her heartbeat in her ears. You're lying, she said flatly. Am I? Karen tucked her phone away. Well, I suppose we'll find out when my lawyer files the property dispute tomorrow morning. Along with the environmental violation report, of course. Mrs. Chen stepped forward. Karen, surely this can be resolved. Oh, it can, Karen agreed. Sarah just needs to acknowledge that she's been trespassing on my land for 3 years, pay me fair market rent for the usage, and properly remediate the environmental damage she's caused by draining toxic chemicals onto my soil. Sarah felt something snap inside her chest. 3 months of grief, humiliation, and financial terror crystallized into pure rage. Get off my property. Actually, Karen said, gesturing toward the pool, you might want to get off mine. The pool pump continued its mechanical grinding, oblivious to the war being declared around it. Water level had dropped to the 4-foot mark, revealing more of the pool skeleton. Sarah stared at the disappearing water and realized that Karen was right about one thing. When you drained away the surface, you revealed what had been hidden underneath. But Karen had made one crucial mistake. She assumed Sarah would back down, would crumble under the weight of legal threats and financial pressure like David had expected her to do when he'd walked away. Karen didn't know that Sarah had spent the last 3 months discovering exactly how much she could endure, how much she could fight, how far she was willing to go when someone tried to take away the last thing she had left. Sarah walked to the pool pump and turned it off. The sudden silence felt ominous. "You want to play property law games?" Sarah asked quietly. "Fine. But I suggest you make very sure your survey is accurate, Karen. Because if you're wrong, if you're lying to try to intimidate me, I'm going to make sure everyone in this neighborhood knows exactly what kind of person you really are." Karen's confidence flickered for just a moment. "I'm not wrong. We'll see." Sarah picked up her coffee mug and headed toward her house. "Oh, and Karen? Next time you want to have a conversation about my property, call first. Or better yet, have your lawyer call mine." She was halfway to her back door when Karen's voice stopped her cold. "You don't have a lawyer, Sarah. David's attorney told my attorney that you couldn't afford one in the divorce. That's why you ended up with nothing but debt and a house you can't maintain." Sarah turned around slowly. Mrs. Chen had gone pale. Karen looked triumphant. "David's attorney," Sarah repeated carefully, "told your attorney." "Well, of course. Richard Henderson handles all the legal work for the better families in the neighborhood. He's been my family lawyer.